Good evening, good afternoon, respectively. First of all, it's great to see everybody. It's really, I don't want to say it's really, really moving because I refuse to admit that Zoom is just as good as in-person contact, but nevertheless, it's really exciting, really moving to see everyone here and to see familiar faces, and the sense also of not being able to connect in person has been disturbing. Missing out the shabbaton, and missing the visits, missing your coming to the yeshiva. It's been zechaser, and at least this is second best, and it's been moving to be able to get together. And yishar koach for everyone who organized and everyone who came and is with us. Since my job is to give, I guess Rosh Yeshiva, my job is to give a Dvar Torah, so we got to do that. I'll start with the point. I mentioned this in the Tish 2 weeks ago for the B'nai Chul. If anyone was there, anyone who was there is here, he'll get it recycled, but it's even better because he'll finally seep in. But I really feel strongly about this, so I'll say it. Yoseph says at the end of the parsha we read yesterday, that the brothers come to Yoseph, and Vayu achei Yosef kimet avihem ve'emru lu yistamenu Yosef v'ashev yashiv lanu et kol ha'ra asher gamalnu oto. Okay, then they go to Yosef, and he should please forgive them. And Yaakov Kaviyachol either did or did not claim that they should forgive him. Vayomer alihem Yosef al tirau ki atachat elokim ani va'atem chashavtem alai ra'a elokim chashava litova למען לעשות כיום הזה להחיות עם רב. Yosef here is looking at the end, and the end seems to be a happy ending, at least in Parshat Vayechi, with Lachayot Am Rav. And this, of course, repeats similar psukim he said in Vayigash, when he reveals himself to the brothers and they meet. It's the same thing. There too, he tells them, "Don't worry, it's all from Mishamayim. The Kadosh Baruch Hu did everything. It wasn't your ideas. It's all from Kadosh Baruch Hu." Now, on one level, right, there's a happy end, and Yosef is able to save Am Yisrael, etc. But from another level, think about Yosef's life. Yosef basically lost control of his life. Yosef is extremely ambitious. Right, as a teenager, he's dreaming to conquer the world. Hashemesh, Vayareach, V'chadaso kochavim mishtachavim li. Yosef basically wants the whole cosmos to bow down to him. So, of course, Yaakov interprets it metaphorically to mean the family, but clearly when you dream about the heavenly bodies bowing down to you, what you're really dreaming is that you conquer the world. And Yosef, he really is dreaming on a grand canvas. He'll run the world. And he's ambitious, he's energetic, he's set to conquer the world. And all of a sudden, at the age of 17, he loses control of his life. His life is totally upended. There he is, he's thrown into a pit. He's then he's kidnapped. He becomes from, a subject, a gavra, from a person who controls his destiny, from Yaakov Avinu's favorite son, from Yaakov's right-hand man, he becomes all of a sudden like a sack of merchandise, and that's thrown into the back of a camel. And there he is. He's lost all control over his life. He comes to Egypt. He somehow is able to piece together some of it. He's able to get some minimal control, to restore some kind of control, at least locally, over his life. But essentially, he's at a dead end. And when he hits his dead end, he's totally stuck. And I can imagine Yosef in Potiphar's house, and certainly later on when he's in the bar in Beit HaSohar, Yosef must be at some points in his life, lying in his bed in the evenings and thinking to himself, I'm an abject failure. I dreamt to conquer the world. Look how pathetic I must look. For a person who told everyone to dream of conquering the world, for a person who has the Shemesh and Yereach, Mishtachavim, there he is. What's he doing? He's a slave, a miserly slave. in Beit Potiphar, and later on, of course, worse. And Yosef feels defeated. He feels helpless. Not only hopeless, but also helpless. He has no control whatsoever over his life. And the matter of fact, it's true. Even later on, when he's elevated to a position of prominence, when he's promoted to be number 2 in all of Egypt, he also has no control. Nobody asks him whether he wants to do that. No one says to him, maybe you want to go home, maybe you want to go back to your family, maybe you want to go back to Eretz Avotecha. No, he's not offered the choice whether or not to say yes or no to Paro. It's clear. He says yes. He says no. He goes back to Sar Mashkim and Sar Hofim, or probably to Sar Hofim. And basically, he has no control whatsoever. From the age of 17, he has no control over his life. And even later on, it's hard to know. Even after Yaakov comes down, it's hard to know. And that's basically Yosef is reacting and responding to circumstances rather than being able to initiate, being able to determine his own fate. And at least the way I understand Yosef, it's probably, I would say extremely difficult. It's probably devastating to Yosef. His whole point was, I'm going to forge my own destiny. I'm going to create. I'm going to, ani aseh, ani yatzer, ani ovil, ani anhig, ani anavet. And he's going no place. What happens when he says to the brothers, Elokim chashava litova? Essentially, Yosef was able to retain control over 2 things. Despite the fact he lost control over the whole trajectory of his life, there were 2 things that he was able to maintain control. One of them is the interpretation. Yosef retains the ability to interpret his life. It's true, he has external circumstances, political circumstances, personal freedom, legal circumstances. He's lost control over that. What really, really matters is the ability to interpret for himself and to give meaning to what's happened. He retains control over that. He can say to himself, look, my life isn't wasted. I dreamt to grow up in Eretz Yisrael. I was going to lead the family. The Shemesh Yarech, etc. were going to bow down to me. And it didn't happen. My whole plan was basically shredded. Or he can say to himself, Nachon, things are not the way I planned them. But life is often dynamic and life often changes. But I am able, if not to navigate the external forces, I can navigate and determine and interpret the inner forces. Meaning, he's the master of determining what his destiny is. And in a sense, he can determine what it means. Is he living a life of a mission? Is he living a life full of meaning or not? It all depends how he will interpret this to himself. And when he comes and says, basically, the Kodesh Baruch Hu sent me. And Kodesh Baruch Hu worked things out very differently than the way I expected. Kodesh Baruch Hu had different ideas in mind, but nevertheless, I am basically Kodesh Baruch Hu's assistant. I'm working with Shem Hashem. He's giving I basically saved Am Yisrael. I've rescued all Am Yisrael. Yaakov maybe didn't, maybe things happened differently, but at the end of the day, I'm leading the family, and not stop leading the family. I'm basically rescuing the family. And I did the same Yosef, who stood up to Esav according to the Medrash at the age of 6 or whatever, and now he has a much more important role. And looking, retrospectively, he can reinterpret the whole course of events. He wasn't stam sold. He was sold for a purpose, because Baruch had a plan. And this essentially is, this is the first thing he maintains control of, the ability to give meaning to his life. And the second thing he maintains control over are his values. I don't want to get now into long interpretation of the whole story of Eshe Potiphar, but in a nutshell, Yosef is able to maintain his values. And I'll explain briefly. Some of you probably heard this in the past. The nisayon of Eshet Potifar is not only the sexual temptation. Of course, it's an element. It's an element of the story that the Gemara in Sota emphasizes. One could say very forcefully and even graphically. But so the Gemara really focuses upon simply the fact that he left a 17-year-old. He's never had any release for his temptation, for sexual energies and the like. And certainly it's there. But there's something even more basic, I think, at play there in terms of Nisayon. Yoseph, as I said before, he hit a brick wall at 100 miles per hour, you could say even. And there's one slim chance of picking up the pieces. Like basically, Eshet Potifar is a ladder to climb out of the pit that he's in. Eshet Potifar is a manipulative and scheming woman. That's clear from the whole story. And it's not too far-fetched to assume that Yosef may have said to himself, I have a nevuah. I have a dream. I got a nevuah from the Kadosh Baruch Hu. The nevuah was that I will be in Apparently, he sent Eshet Potifar. She will bump off Potifar. She will push him aside. Yosef will replace Potifar. He'll become the head of a prominent Egyptian household. And from here, this is the first step on a ladder which will take him to many further achievements. Because apparently, this problem, now, Yosef could justify this to himself. He could have said to himself, there's a nevuah, it's Potifar has no business owning me. He could have rationalized it. And man, as we all know, is a very adaptive creature who loves to rationalize and justify what he wants to achieve. And he very well could have, the temptation to do it was extreme in terms of achieving his ambition and escaping from the circumstances. But he doesn't do it. With Yosef, and Yosef maintains full control over his values, his morality, his values. And this is a theme throughout Sefer Bereshit, that you cannot justify national and personal accomplishments, even if you believe they're divinely mandated, by cutting moral corners. And the Ramban says by Hagar and Avraham and Sarah, and it's certainly true by Yosef, you can't cut moral corners. And Yosef therefore retains control over these two pivotal elements. One is his interpretation of giving meaning to his life, and the other is his morals. Now, aside from being Parshut and Chumash, you can either take it or leave it. One of the reasons I thought about this year and not maybe less so in previous years, to a certain degree, I feel, this is part of what's going on, what's happening the last 9-10 months to us as well. Normally, in the normal course of affairs, you can usually divorce, your personal life, your inner life, what goes on in the news. Right? You can follow politics, business, sports, if they interest you. You cannot follow them. You have to read a newspaper to know about how you're going to run your life this week or next week or a month or a year from now. You're interested in politics, you read a newspaper. You're not interested in politics, you don't. You're interested in economics, you read the business section, etc. It doesn't impact your life. You have basically autonomy over your inner life, your family life, and whether or not how you interact with the world at large. It's a question of, it's optional. You can decide optionally the right thing to do is to interact. You can decide the right thing is optionally to volunteer, to get involved in politics and security and communal leadership. But it's up to you to decide. In the last 9 months, I feel is, no, what dictates my daily schedule. If I go to a wedding or I go to Shiva, I'm probably not going to go to a Shiva of a best friend this week who's seeing Shiva twice in a month because the government doesn't let me do it. The government basically is dictating my life. Whether my daughter can come for Shabbos or not is being dictated by the news. Whether I can daven in my shul or not is being dictated by outside authorities. in a sense, I've lost control. We've all lost control over over our lives to a certain degree. External forces which are more powerful than us, some of them medical, some of them legal, are dictating to us our lives. And I think that's enochanami. I reminded myself there's a tshuva in one of the 17th century poets, either Chavsiyar or the Yaakov Emden. Can you read a newspaper on Shabbos? It's a well-known discussion whether it's mutar also to read newspapers on Shabbos. And so he says the tshuva, and besides for everything else, and this is mid-17th century Europe, of course you have to read a newspaper on Shabbos. How do you know whether to escape south or north, east or west? Because next time they're raiding Turks, or the next time there'll be a big battle between various the Holy Roman Empire or the Turks, or God, who knows? Next time there'll be a war, you have to know how to escape. In other words, you can't be oblivious to the news because they dictate your life. And this is not how we lived our lives in the past. But I do think that we still have the opportunity, we still have the ability to interpret for ourselves. And I don't know each and every person, the circumstances, of his life at the moment. But I do know that to a large degree, how we experience this, and of course it makes a difference how much you're affected, and chas v'sholom, you've been affected tragically or not. But I think to a large degree we can say to ourselves, we have the option. I said to the guys in the yeshiva, they can, 50 years from now, when they'll be in their 70s, Bezrat Hashem, they can take their grandchild in their lap, and they have one or two narratives they can tell to the kid. One narrative will be, I was in yeshiva in 2020. What a lousy year, and I drew the wrong lot. I was in the year, I was shortchanged. I wasn't able to interact with Israelis. I couldn't go on leave. I couldn't go out for shabbaton. I was stuck indoors. My Rebbe couldn't invite me for a meal, etc., etc. You can go on, and basically describing, what a mediocre year it was in those circumstances. And that's a narrative. And you have another narrative, which is, in the midst of a pandemic, a once in 100 years event, we rose to the occasion. We had a unique year. We had a year in which we were called upon to raise the banner of Torah, in which we held the fort, in which the intensity of the year made our, enhanced our learning. The Dibuk Chaverim was amazing. After the fact that we're together with the staff, facing such external threats, brought us all closer together. Kippur was different, even though it was behind nylons, and the davening was shortened because we were davening in the face of a pandemic, etc. It was basically what would the takeaway from this year, to a large degree, is up to us, and how we determine how we relate to this, and how we will interpret this to ourselves. Now it's true. Now, each and every one of you is a different station, but I suspect that to a large degree, this relates to all of us regarding how we'll be able to relate to these events. I'd say more broadly speaking, I think like the decade between 20 and 30 in a person's life often takes you to many unexpected places. It takes you to many, many of the plans, and between 10 to 20, your plans are relatively straightforward, unless you, I'm not saying things never happen, but broadly speaking, most people, the plans that, which are laid for them, what school they go to, what high school they go to, relatively speaking, the course that was plotted out usually happens. From 20 to 30, so many different things happen in terms of, basically the only expected thing is that unexpected things will happen. It could be in terms of health. It can be in terms of where you live. You got a job opportunity you never dreamt of having. You lost something. There's so many different things which, your lives may work out very differently than what you planned. The crucial thing is to maintain the two things I said before: A, your values, and B, the meaning you will give to it. This is the idea of tshuva. That tshuva, how does tshuva improve the past? What happens don't know, it becomes zechuyot. What you do in the future reinterprets the past. What happened once upon a time gets new meaning and takes on new life based upon where you take in the future. You can take your failure and your sin, and it can drag you down, and then it becomes even worse. You can take your sin, your failure, and leverage it to a much better place. And essentially the zadon becomes a zchut. It's really up to you how you interpret the past, based upon what you do in the future, and based upon the meaning you'll give to it. So I think this is one of the messages that we take away from Yoseph. He ended up in Egypt. Things didn't work out the way he planned. Am Yisrael ended up in Egypt. But the big lesson Yosef is teaching us is it's up to us to interpret, and it's up to us to maintain our values, even though we're very unexpected places. And B'ezras Hashem, I'm sure that each and every one of you is maintaining the values. And basically, I'm issuing the challenge to follow in Yosef and to consider asking yourselves how you want to interpret, and both this year and many other years. The way you go through life, whoever unexpected paths you will end up going down them. Okay, Toda Rabba Litraot.
Thank you, Rav Moshe.